Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hey everyone, good afternoon and welcome. I'm Susan Kaufman and you are listening to Attitude Magazine's weekly ADHD Experts audio broadcast. If you're a parent, you've probably wondered about the science behind the brain training programs that we all hear about, maybe as an alternative to medication, or you've considered it, or even a complement to medication for your child, or even for yourself as an adult with attention deficit, with learning disabilities or autism spectrum disorders. Today's topic will be of great interest to you as it is to me. It's neurofeedback and cognitive training, what the research tells us about it, and what the science behind it is. Let me just thank the sponsor of today's webinar, which is Play Attention. Play Attention is an easy-to-use, advanced neurofeedback system that can improve attention, behavior, and cognitive skills in ADHD children. For more information about Play Attention, please log on to www.playattention.com. Today, we are so fortunate to have Dr. Naomi Steiner with us. She is a developmental and behavioral pediatrician based in Boston at the Floating Hospital for Children, and the single leading researcher in the country and internationally in the field of attention training through neurofeedback, computer exercises, yoga, relaxation, breathing, biofeedback. She's been working with families and children with attention deficit, learning disabilities, autism spectrum disorders, and a number of other problems for over 20 years. And for much more information about her research, visit her website at www.attentiontutoring.com. Today, Dr. Steiner will talk about the limitation of medication for treating ADHD, as well as the science behind computer-based interventions, such as neurofeedback and cognitive training. Dr. Steiner, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yes, I am absolutely delighted to be speaking at this Attitude webinar. I just want to say 2 words as regards to me being a developmental and behavioral pediatrician. Some people are not quite aware of what that is, but I am a pediatrician and I have a subspecialty in developmental and behavioral pediatrics. So the diagnosis that I frequently give are ADHD, but also anxiety, depression, autism, and also learning disabilities and intellectual disabilities, global developmental delay. So there's a variety of diagnoses there. I do testing, diagnosis, recommendations, and follow-ups of these children. So that's kind of my clinical life that I've been doing, and I'm delighted today to be speaking about my research life too. And I think that it's really fascinating that I'm coming on now as the summer is hitting. Most of the kids and college kids, they just finished their year, and summer sometimes is a time of reevaluation and looking at different things. So I think that it falls well for families. And just to add a little bit on to what Susan said is that I will be extending this talk a little bit from not only the little kiddies, but also into young adulthood and adults because this does extend as a problem into adulthood. So just to kind of be inclusive in the discussion. As a disclosure, I just wanted to say that I have not received any grants, research support, or payment through any neurofeedback or computer attention training commercial entities. As Susan did point out, I do have a company which is Attention Tutoring, and that is relevant because we do actually use neurofeedback. We train executive function skills, and we do relaxation breathing through biofeedback. But for our listeners it might be interesting because I often get a question, so what kind of references, what articles? And you see you go on the website and you scroll down, you can find some of the links or lists of references too, and that might be helpful. So I know that most of the listeners here at Attitude are, really familiar about the basics of, the ADHD and what it means, that there are 2 major kind of lists of criteria. The first list is for the inattentive criteria. There are 9 of them, and the second one is for the hyperactive impulsive. So I'm not really going to go through them in detail, but I just want to point out a few things here that I have highlighted, 2 things here in red that as the DSM that's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual which made these lists, adapted into its 5th version, they added on the word work into this list of inattentive symptoms. And I just wanted to underline that even though that did kind of like engage the adult population of people who do have attentional difficulties, clearly the full list was not really readapted. And I think that that is really relevant to our discussion today as adults too, or wondering if neurofeedback, for instance, might be helpful for them, but they might not fully meet the criteria of this list, which is here, which is more geared towards children. So I just wanted to underline how important it is for adults to kind of realize that they, even though they might not be fully diagnosed because the diagnostic criteria have not been fully adapted to them, still it's correct that they might feel that they have certain symptoms which are affecting their function in daily life, and to look for ways to help them. And I really do encourage that. Then I wanted to point to another point which I will be coming back to a few times during this talk, and that is the point 5, which is difficulty organizing tasks and activities. And if you note, this is in the list of the criteria for inattention. It's not really inattention that we're talking about here. It is clearly organizational activities, or what we call executive functions. And even though I think that it's really great that this is being taken somewhat into consideration, it's really, really important for parents and adults who have attentional difficulties, ADHD, ADD, to think about executive functions. They very frequently, or nearly always even, up to 80 or 90% of the cases seen by different studies, come together. And executive function skills and therefore deficits affect people's function in their daily lives tremendously. And I usually say, as soon as a student hits middle school with multiple teachers and changing classrooms, if a student has executive function deficits, which again go hand in hand, usually not always, with ADHD, they will be having significant organizational issues that have to be taken into consideration. And just a little bit from a kind of science perspective, both ADHD, ADD, and the executive function deficits, or even their function of paying attention and being able to get organized, all of this is kind of centered in that prefrontal cortex, which kind of makes sense when we're thinking about symptoms and how that works. So this is the second list that many of you have seen multiple times if, say, you've been looking on the web or listening to other presenters. And these are just the criteria, the 9 criteria for the list of being hyperactive or impulsive. A lot of people in the adult world use the word ADD, and that's attention deficit disorder, and that's usually used just for those who have the first list of inattentiveness. So moving on a little bit to the traditional kind of way of thinking of ADHD or ADD in adults, and the way that if you go and see a pediatrician is going to be approached to you, and many of you have probably lived through this. So as I said before, the traditional diagnosis, which is listed to your left there, is looking at the symptoms of attention and then looking at the symptoms and the list of the hyperactivity, impulsivity. And depending on the criteria that you get, you will receive the diagnosis. And then you start thinking of the traditional types of therapies, and then there are 2 major roads that are going to be presented to you, and that's medication and or behavioral therapy. In the preschoolers, we usually start with behavior therapy, but after preschool, it's going to be either or both. And I'm going to talk just a little bit, and not for the full time, but just a little bit why one would look at traditional, non-traditional approaches, and that's because of the limitations of stimulant therapy. Now, of course, stimulant therapy can be successful, and we know that it can be successful when used and when used continuously, and those are 2 big whens or ifs, up to 70, 80% of the time. Some research shows higher. However, research on stimulant medication has also shown that they often limit impact on domains of functional impairment. So that means to say that, remember those lists, children might get better on one criteria or another criteria, which is absolutely great and everybody's smiling, but if they're still forgetting to give in their homework, that's their function, and that's very important. Stimulant medication, we know, does not necessarily normalize behavior. And there is no establishment of long-term effects of stimulant medication. These studies are starting to come out, but by no means do we really know this, or of adverse effects. What we do know is that once a child stops taking the medication, the effect stops. And that's something really important to think about, because what it means to say is, yes, it might be helpful up to those 70, 80, sometimes even higher percent, but only as long as the medication is taken. There are no skills learned. Long-term use is rare, which I think is very relevant as we move forward and are talking about this topic. And it means to say that it might be very successful during the first few months, but in fact, what we know is that there are few students and adults who actually take usually stimulant medication over years or over their lifetime. Parents and teachers show limited satisfaction, and the complex family kind of dynamic problems are not supported often by just taking stimulant medications. And the big one, why I'm sure that there are so many of you listening right now, is that some families are not willing to try medication, and I think this is a very big deal that we need to respect. So now moving on to the non-traditional approach. Why talk about this, and why talk about it now? The two major bullets is what's coming along together right now. Number one is the neuroscience, which is basically all these scientists who've been putting people in scans, the MRIs, the fMRIs, and they've been looking at the brain, they've been seeing how it changes and how it doesn't change, and they've been looking at changes between people with ADHD and who do not have ADHD. And so the neuroscience has really brought us along a long way, and for us to start to learn about how the brain works. And one thing that we know about the brain now, which has been pretty much accepted by neuroscience, is that there's something called brain plasticity. Brain plasticity is the ability of the brain to learn, to form new connections, and to basically make changes. And that's what we're going to be talking about as we look at these therapies and how they might change the brain. And that's the big difference of what we were talking about as regards to stimulants in and out of the body. Here we're really looking at to see if there could be a new approach where we could actually train the brain and change what's going on in the brain. And this comes along in this timeline where we are right now in the 21st century with technology progress. And what this means to say is that the huge machines and computers that used to be really large and bulky have now become much, much more sophisticated, much easier to use. And so it makes these types of computer training and neurofeedback training much, much easier and much, much more feasible. So that's really what we're talking about today. We're talking about technology meeting neuroscience, and can it be used in practice, in real life? In order to walk you listeners through a little bit where we're coming from with the neurofeedback and the computer attention training, I'm going to illustrate this with a study that we ran in 19 elementary schools, so that you get a little bit of a thought process of how we look at this and what the results mean. So we did this study to look at two computer-based attention training systems. So one was neurofeedback, and the other one was cognitive attention training. And we did this with the goal so that children with ADHD, ADD would attend more effectively. And I just want to reiterate that when I say ADHD, that's more like the medical term, but I also include people with ADD. So to begin off with, this kind of what I find is a fascinating question, which was, why on earth would we even think of doing neurofeedback, and why would neurofeedback even work? What's the thought process behind there? And first, I'd like to just underline quickly that there are many different types of neurofeedback approaches and neurofeedback protocols, and there are even different types of neurofeedback approaches for different conditions. And I'm just going to present today an overall rationale of why we would think about this for ADHD in a manner so that our listeners can understand, but without going into great detail, because I don't think that would really be the most important thing right now. So the rationale for using neurofeedback in children and people who have ADHD is because there are consistently reported deficits of cortical activation in the frontal brain of children with ADHD. So if I repeat this, what I'm saying is that the EEG waves, if they're looked at in people with ADHD, it looks different. And it looks different specifically around the frontal brain area. And as I said before, that's where the game playing is going on as regards to being able to focus, to being able to control impulsivity too, and also as regards to those executive functions. So the number one difference is that there's an increase in theta waves. That's kind of like that first line. So the theta waves are the drowsiness and dreaming kind of waves. So the way that I like to explain this the best is as if this increase leads to drowsiness, which is a little bit like how you feel when you get up in the morning and you have not yet had your coffee, okay? And so this is not good news if, say, you want to be able to switch your brain on and get something done immediately, just as the teacher tells you, or just as you have to do so in your workstation at work because you have an assignment and it has to get done, period. It might be boring, it might not be fascinating, but you have to do your math, you have to write those emails. And so theta waves and being in a kind of like I'm not really alert state makes this more difficult. And then the second situation is that there is a decrease in beta waves, and that's the gray bar. And having a decrease in beta waves means that the beta waves are used for active thinking, for concentration, for alertness. These are the I'm ready to go, I'm ready to listen to you, and I'm ready to get something done and to switch my brain on maximum to be able to get that done correctly without any, let's say, careless mistakes, right? Which is when you just become distracted and you make a careless mistake. And one way that I like to explain this difference in the brain to people is that having an increased amount of theta waves and decrease in beta waves really means to say that switching the brain on for people with ADHD, it's difficult and it's non-automatic. So I like to compare, even if you're an adult, to the situation where we have kindergarten, we have all these cute kindergarteners sitting around in circle time, and the teacher is talking, and all the kids are kind of listening to the teachers, eye locked on teachers. They've just been able to flip the switch on. And it's a little bit like that light switch you have when you're going into a room. You just flip the light switch and you just go bang with your finger and it just pops on. And it's like something which is really easy to do. And however, for somebody who has ADHD, it's not like a little flip. It's like a lever. It's like, oh, I have to focus. And unless it's really something that they enjoy doing, those beta waves, they're not going to be able to get that amplitude up. It's really difficult to switch the brain on. And then what some children and adults have is that they might be able to switch it on, but they can't maintain strong beta wave amplitudes. So those are like two of the big issues going on, and the differences that we see in the brains of people who have difficulty to pay attention and those who are just typical, and this is just nearly automatic and easy. Now, the deal with neurofeedback is the concept of cortical self-regulation. And what this means and has been shown to happen is that it means that we are in fact able to self-regulate our cortical activation. We can actually change what our EEG pattern looks like. And we can do this, and we can train ourselves to do this through training through neurofeedback. And I'm going to explain to you a little bit how this can work. So you see, this is just one example. I want to underline again that there are many, many different types of the way that neurofeedback systems. But here, there's an EEG sensor which is placed in the middle of the helmet, and basically the participant that reads those better and better ways. And what happens is that the person who's doing the EEG biofeedback will look at the screen, will look, for instance, at the orca, and as the theta waves decrease and the beta waves, which are those focusing waves, increase, the orca will go to the bottom of the sea, and that is the feedback. The orca goes to the bottom of the sea, that feedback, I am focusing, and that's a feel that this new feel that's given to the people doing this of, oh, okay, this is what it feels like to focus. And then for some people, they look, in this example, but again, there are many different systems. Here at the upper left-hand corner, the bar goes red, fully red. It means that I'm fully concentrated right now. And so as the brain switches on, the orca goes down to the bottom of the sea, and as the brain remains on, it remains at the bottom of the sea. And that trains the participant to switch their brain on and to keep the brain on. And it is this practice that makes this, that makes it easier and easier for children and adults during neurofeedback to be able to do this process, to get their brain going and switching on. So that was just the overview for the neurofeedback. I'm going to talk a little bit now about cognitive attention training. And so people usually think of like video game-like type kind of exercises, but they're not really like video games. They're in fact computer tasks, computer exercises. They are interactive, but they're not your regular video games. And so these have been developed specifically, usually in this case, to train attention, along with working memory. And it gives also immediate feedback, and children will progress to higher levels. And there has been a certain amount of research that has been looking into this too. So for instance, here children will look at doubles of a letter and the numbers, and then they will put it in the tablet, in the little panel to your right, and if they get the answers correct, the safe will open up and say, hey, you did an absolutely fabulous job, and that's very encouraging for the students. So now moving on to a little bit what we did. So I get a lot of questions about, okay, so how many sessions are we supposed to do, and what's the minimum and what's the maximum? And so there's no golden standard because everybody's brain is obviously different. But in general, this is what we did. We did what's written down on the screen. In general, what we know is that students should get between 30-45 minute sessions. That's in front of the computer. 30 to 45 minutes in front of the computer, and they should do this at least twice a week. So here we did it 3 times a week, but it should be at least twice a week. And the reason for this is that you really want to try to get the brain going. It's a little bit like when you go to the gym and you go there every blue moon. I mean, nothing really is going to be happening here. So we want to get people on a training schedule, and so it's going to require those 30 to 45 minutes to 45 minutes twice a week. And so the average of 40 sessions is an average which is frequently done. These were elementary school children. Sometimes in adults that is a lesser number. And in real life, clinically, practitioners will usually look at what the effect is in order to determine this too. How far are we moving along? But that's in general what we're looking at as regards to how much time investment are we looking at. And I just wanted to go back to this point, and I think that parents have probably already made this kind of time investment calculation. It seems that it's a lot of effort up front, but remembering that it might be a complementary or alternative kind of approach, and they might be, for instance, be using something like weekly behavior therapy, but this has been going on for 2-3 years, or medication, and that's something you take every day over years. So I think that that's important to put it in context. And again, I want to remind everybody that I'm coming from this as a developmental and behavioral pediatrician. So really from that neutral spot of having people come to see me and asking me, what do you think works? So this is just the study design. I'm not going to go into great detail, but the most important thing is that we had a group of children, and then we flipped the coin. That's called randomization, and they were placed in a neurofeedback group, that's the top one, then or in the computer attention training group, or in what's called WLT, that's waitlist control, or control group. And the reason why there's a control group is that, as you know, kids, they're going to mature and they're going to get better anyway, kind of thing. So we wanted to make sure that what we were looking at is not because they're, quote, getting better anyway, and that's why you have a control group. And as you see, we're going to look at the just before the intervention to just after the intervention, and then we're going to look at just before the intervention to 6 months later and see what that looks like. So first of all, I'm going to show you the results for the neurofeedback group, that first group that gets the EEG biofeedback or the neurofeedback. And I'm going to go through these results with you just so that you understand a little bit of what is found in the literature, because these results have, they come along with studies that have been published since then too. So the first two bars here are for a classroom observation. And this classroom observation was what we call double-blinded. So the person who went into the classroom did not know whether the child they were observing, in which group the child was, whether it was a child who had received neurofeedback, the computer attention training, or nothing at all. So they were blind, and the child did not know that they were being observed. So this is what we call a double-blind situation, and in fact, it is the absolute golden standard of research. And little stars on top of bars are good, because that means to say that there is a statistical improvement. That means to say that it's not just I'm showing you a very elongated bar and I'm trying to trick you at something. Mathematically, actually, there was a difference. There was a statistical significant difference. And so that's really good. And just before I go on to the blue bar, I just wanted to say that these observations showed that the children got better for their engagement, so for their attention scores, and for they had reduced off-task behaviors. These are things like moving around, getting up from their chair and talking to their buddy next to them. So that's really good news. Now moving on to the corners that the parents filled out, and these are, you might have heard, this is an ADHD type questionnaire, and the parents filled these out. What we see here is that the parents reported that these children got better with executive function, inattention, and hyperactivity and impulsivity. And you see those little stars again, which is really good news. It means to say that I'm not just showing you high bars, I'm showing you things which have been shown to have statistical significance, where we're expecting the kids to get better. And here we have the results on the brief, which is the executive function questionnaire. And you see that their behavior got better, the way that they were thinking about planning got better, and their overall executive function scores got better. And I'm going to be speaking a little bit more about this later on, because as I said at the beginning, children and adults with ADHD very often or nearly always have some areas of executive function skills with difficulties, and these can really impact daily life. In fact, what we know from recent MRI studies is that sometimes it is these executive function skills which might be sustained, these executive function skill deficits might in fact be sustained even longer into adulthood. So it's really important to be looking at this. So now what I'm going to show you are, remember, these are the just before the children started compared to just after the children had finished their neurofeedback. And now I'm going to show you what we found the following school year when these children were looked at again. And so this is 6 months later, the following school year. And as you see, there's a bar which is just next door. The dark bar is the sustained effect. So it's the following school year. And this is exactly, in fact, what you see. I just want to point out that usually in behavior medicine, it's much more, you have an effect. It's kind of like you teach the dog a trick, and then, you stop reminding, giving reminders, and then, nobody does the trick anymore. So you actually would expect usually the follow-up, that darker bar to be lower. However, here, what you see, it's like it's bang against the lighter bar. So what we call this, we call this that there are sustained results. And that is extremely important. And I was just having a little chat with Susan before we went on live, and she was saying this is one of the major questions that parents have there. And just so that everybody realizes, these sustained outcome measures for neurofeedback, I'm not the only person who found this. This actually goes along with the rest of the neurofeedback research. That in fact, when we're looking at positive results, we're actually expecting them to be sustained, or in some cases actually to continue to increase. And I think that that's very important. And again, I want to underline how also for the brief, the executive function questionnaire that the parents filled out, that we still have sustainability of these, the progress that the children made in executive functions. And that's, as I continue to say now, hope I'm getting the message through, is very, very important. So I've moved on now to the computer attention training group. And as you see, we do see some progress here. It's not that it's all completely a flat line, but it's pretty obvious to the eye that there are less improvements compared to the neurofeedback group. I often get asked, does this mean to say that forget cognitive attention training, it's not going to be used? What we know about cognitive attention training at this point is that it seems that the skills that are trained are not always generalizable. And so what this means is that, for instance, if someone is being trained through working memory, for instance, to repeat 5 numbers forward and then 5 numbers backwards, that's really an excellent skill, because you need to be able to have working memory in order to, get through school. You need to remember all the instructions that the teacher is telling you, right? So what we know is that kids are able to repeat these numbers. Kids and adults are able to learn these working memory skills and repeat them back and get better and better and move on to higher levels. However, there is less evidence that shows that in real life, and these outcome measures are real life, right? That in real life that they generalize. So it's a little bit like I can remember a lot of numbers, but I might not remember to give my homework in. Now, I did hear that you did hear about video games. There is research coming out from the video game side that it could be a problem with complexity, and that some research on the video game side, which have, so video games are extremely complex. There are people attacking others. I'm a pediatrician, so this is not something I necessarily, recommend. But basically, there's a plot going on, there's a strategy going on. You have to remember, you need to plan and organize, remember those executive functions, and then there are distractors moving around. So video games are often extremely complex. And the thought is that perhaps the computer attention training systems at this point might not be complex enough in order to make changes in the brain which is generalizable. The other point I think is interesting is that it's also, we do think that computer attention training can in fact help a subgroup possibly of students, and we saw this, as you see from the picture here. Some students did benefit. The only issue somewhat is that there's no research which has really been able to pinpoint down, what the profile would be of those students. We think there might be more students with special education needs, but there's no real solid research that can really help guide us to answer that question. But I do think that as technology advances, we will continue to come back to these type of systems to try to help to support students and also adults. So here, moving on to what we call the WLC, the waitlist control or control group. Remember, this is a group that we use just to look at maturation, because you expect people to get better anyway. And as you see, there was a maturation, so the kids did get older, and but there's not really very much action. And in fact, even though you're looking at some bars, it's pretty much nothing was going on. And for the researchers out there, what I want to just give a quick liner, not to scare everybody, I'm not going to be speaking about this a lot, but just to give a quick liner, is that we did run the growth models, and on my website you can get the full quotation of the pediatrics article. So we ran pretty sophisticated growth models, and we compared the neurofeedback group to this waitlist to this control group, and we found a significance in all of the outcome measures. Whereas for the computer attention training group, there was only significance in one subscale. So I just wanted to point that out for the researchers, because otherwise I know that someone would rightly so have asked me that question. So now moving on to stimulant medication, what was interesting in our study is that it was what we call translational research. It was in schools. In fact, it was funded by the Department of Education. And so we were in schools, and as translational research goes, you basically take the school as it is and the children as they are, and then you implement an intervention. And so part of that implementation is that you're inclusive versus exclusive. And what that means to say is that you include, we included students, for instance, with who were on medication. And then when we finished the study, we looked at the differences of gains that students made, and we compared the groups. We looked at those bars, and we compared the groups who were on medication versus off medication. And what we found was that both groups progressed the same amount. And this is really, really important from just a clinical aspect. To answer the question, so can you do neurofeedback if a child or an adult is on medication? And what we know now absolutely is that the answer is yes, you can. It's not a contraindication, and we would expect our students and adults to get better, to have the same type of improvement. So that is important. Now, because of the progress that we saw also in executive functioning, for the group with neurofeedback, this was extremely exciting for us. I want to underline how much this actually makes sense, because paying attention, controlling your body so that it's not hyperactive, controlling your body so that it's not impulsive, and executive function, organization, and planning skills. As I was saying before, it makes sense because they're all coming from this prefrontal cortex area, and we know that they have the same kind of loops. One of the important ones is the corticothalamic striatal loop, and they all have these same, they're all working similar loop systems. So we're talking about, when we're doing neurofeedback, that we're actually training these same circuits and these same loops in the same area of the brain. So, in retrospect, everything's great, but in retrospect, it also makes complete sense that we did, in fact, train executive function, and the kids got better. And I just want to underline a little bit, I know that you do have webinars on executive functions, but I just want to underline how absolutely critical this is for folks to pay attention to how they're doing and how they're training and how they're paying attention to their executive function skills. So what we see as the number one thing is, as a difficulty, a deficit, one of the areas is as regards to time management. So first of all, time management awareness, and this is usually completely knocked off in people with ADHD or ADD. Sometimes they are not even aware of what time it is, and they need to train this. Like, I have been looking at the clock on a regular basis because I know that at some point Susan's going to literally cut me off. No, she won't do that. So what time is it? I tell students and people with ADHD, you don't have a watch, you're going to buy a watch. I don't care if you think that your cell phone is stuck to your body. You need to have a watch stuck to your body because you need to enable yourself to be more aware of the time. How long do I think this is going to take? How long do I think this is going to last? So the general response of a student who has ADHD, if you ask him, how long, Johnny, do you think your homework's going to take? It's going to be 20 minutes. I've been trying this out for a few years, like 20 years. And it's because people with ADHD do not have a sense of how much time things are going to take. This is distorted. So it's important to be aware of these things. And even with the younger kids, I strongly recommend using the timer and using it as much as possible. Oh, you think you can get this done in 5 minutes? Let's put the timer on for 5 minutes and see where you're at. Oh, you've only done 1/4. Okay. How much do you think the rest of it is going to take? You've done 1/4, you've still got 75% to go. How long? Still 10 minutes? Oh, you're going up to 30 minutes? Okay, let's put the timer on 30 minutes. This really helps students learn, and adults learn about how long things take. So I just want to point out that time management is huge, and that it overlaps with distractibility. Like, am I distracted? How long am I spending like on the moon, just in dream state? It also has an overlap with procrastination. Like, how long am I simply not going to get myself going? And I can tell you that in my observations, as students progress to be college students and then young adults, procrastination is sometimes the number one factor and the number one difficulty that high school kids and young adults face. This is the number one thing on the list that I recommend people take a very, very close look at. And then becoming hyper-focused, which is kind of like this selective attention where I just don't even realize what's going on around me anymore. Okay. It also leads, the time management difficulties can also lead to paralysis, where I'm just so blocked with time. I just so much can't get myself going that I'm blocked, and it goes along with procrastination. I can't even get myself going. So time management is a big executive function deficit where people with ADHD have to start to become more aware about what's going on. Planning is when, where, how. So when am I supposed to get this done by? Where am I supposed to do it? So it's always, that second line on most of the digital organizers, which is where, that's one line which has to be filled every time, because you're not going to remember, you're going to forget, and you need to know where you're going to go. And we're not talking about which building, we're talking about exactly which room and even who's going to be there. What do I need? So this is the discussion about, you need to have a project finished by tomorrow, but we don't have any more glue in the house, and it's 10 p.m., So what happens then? And this is where the family dynamic comes in. So it's really a family issue, which we know that it's a family issue because of genetics, right? Organizing, this is all about the planning, the pre-planning, the pre-planning, and not only getting the homework in, getting the homework back, reviewing the homework, all these kind of things. Again, executive function skills is problem solving. So what we will see very often is, I'll see a parent who says, oh, he's absolutely brilliant, and it's true. Many, you can be absolutely brilliant and have ADHD, but where the problem kicks in is with slow processing speed. And so sometimes if there's no impulsivity, students with ADD, ADHD require extra time, even if they're brilliant. And most often the area which requires extended organization is the written expression, and that can be difficult. But that can be learned, right? It can be learned through techniques by writing plans and learning how to write plans. Then we have the area of self-monitoring, shifting, and inhibiting, which is also linked with this huge emotional self-regulation, which is very common in people with ADHD. So why, parents often ask me, why do we all, blow up in the family and have outbursts? Well, we're talking about this kind of inhibition, this emotional inhibition, which is difficult, which can get easily triggered. And so this is emotional self-regulation, very important. And I've spoken already a little bit about working memory whilst we're going through things. This is absolutely critical as regards to being able to function. As soon as you start middle school, things get very complicated. And this is an area where students can learn techniques and they can get support to help them with working memory. And often throughout life, in adults, they need to find themselves tricked to accommodate themselves with working memory. Okay, so in summary, what we're looking at right now is that, yes, if we're looking at cutting edge, we can do this in schools. Especially neurofeedback, we saw that the kids got better with ADHD symptomatology, but also executive functions. And the really exciting part, which has also been corroborated by other studies, is that these results were sustained at the 6-month follow-up. So I think that moving forward, and as we hit into the summer where people take a look at the year that's just gone by, we can start to look really now at neuroscience and brain plasticity and how we can change the brains, and think that our brains are there and they are ready to be trained and ready to train. And I just want to point out that if folks want to have a list of references, again, because this is a frequent question, you can go onto my website, scroll down, and there are some of those documents just have lists of references. So with that, I finished this presentation and I turn it over to Susan.
Thank you so much. That was just fascinating. There are just tons of questions. Let me just ask a couple of really practical ones that people have. Do you think, or perhaps the research doesn't tell us yet, will there need to be ongoing brain training? We know that at 6 months the results were there, but people are wondering, would someone, an adult or a child, need to do another session or a set of sessions in 6 months or a year or 2 years down the road? Or do we think that this one 45-week session will take care of the improvements?
You know, that is a fascinating question. We obviously don't have the full answers. There is one study that looked at outcomes 2 years later, and the outcomes were there. The same amount of outcomes were there. So we're really thinking that this is sustained.
Okay.
There are some people who do give neurofeedback, who speak about refresher courses, and those are usually really brief. So we're talking about something like 5 sessions or 6 sessions, and but a lot of people kind of like discuss like what's going on in the brain during those refresher sessions, and the debate remains. It's very interesting. I think that it could be just that. So as you know, as you develop, your brain kind of in the Piagetian kind of way, or it kind of goes from one stage to another. It becomes more complex, more abstract. And so the thought is that if, say, you do a few refresher lessons as your awareness and what we call metacognition, which is the ability to think about how your brain works, has increased. If you sit in front of the neurofeedback again, you go kind of like, oh, yeah, I got it. Yeah, I remember how it was, kind of thing. And so people don't exactly know why there might be a group that might need refresher sessions. We haven't yet fully defined that. But I have not heard of anybody who said, like, we've redone the full
40. Okay. Another practical question that people are asking, is it possible to do this at home? Is there a home? Apparently there are some neurofeedback products that are sold for home use. Are those effective? Have you seen any indication that this can work for parents doing it at home?
So, you know, that question is a little bit the question of, so am I doing a rigid kind of educational program, or am I just trying to train my brain like I'm trying to do to become a super athlete or something like that, so that when it gets go, that I'm able to run my 100 meters just down the road, my brain is just ready, I can switch it on at that moment I've trained it. And so there is this kind of like this high performance approach, which is one thing, and there are easier kind of like you just pop it on your head kind of thing, and you can train those skills. These are coming down the pipeline. I'm not sure that it is yet fully defined how much this is going to actually be supportive for full educational like protocols, and I think that we're going to see these kind of questions are going to be increasingly answered in the future. Also because the systems develop, and there are some systems, and this is going to continue to develop even more, which will be able to be looked at from a satellite situation.
Okay.
It's not going to be necessarily even, the student is at home doing it by himself, but the student is at home it's going to be needed in a live situation, or at least in review of data by a therapist. So these things are going to become, answering this question, this is going to move along very, very fast.
Okay.
And it might be a little bit of a gray zone. If I can just say, I think that specifically for people who do have ADHD, ADD, where it is specifically, I have difficulty with routine and organization, that's where more help might be required, hope that makes sense. So they do need more support to get things done, hence coaching, right? And I'm sure that you have webinars on coaching. So it's not going to be a one-fits-all, but I do think that that the kind of gray zone is going to be looked at more and more to find a good fit for each family.
Okay. Here's a great question from someone. She says, are you saying that neurofeedback actually cures ADHD? In a sense, that is the question. Is there a cure for this kind of executive dysfunction that we see and behavior problems that we see in ADHD?
So, yeah, it's a little bit of a tricky question because what we do know is that the studies that have been done that's looked at pre-intervention, so before the training and then after the training, they do show quote, normalization of the EEG pattern, which means to say that, remember how I was saying that the theta and the beta waves, they were kind of like split before? Well, those do become normalized. So, and again, this is a group effect too, right? So if you take 100 kids, you can never guarantee it's going to work for everybody, but that's right. We do expect normalization. Cure is a word that it's an interesting word. I'm not sure I would go as far as that. I'm not sure that even people
cure is a strong word.
Would want to go as far as that, to tell you quite frankly, because they want to have their creativity. They want to. They don't really want to. They want to have access to their different brain too, but they also want to be able to train certain skills, where they have deficits. So,
here's a really interesting question also. The research clearly shows that neurofeedback is effective in developing metacognitive skills and abilities. Is there any research that shows that translates into success in the workplace or at school? In other words, are we sure that how this can translate to motivation or emotional regulation or the ability to succeed in school or at work?
That is an absolutely great question. And so really the question that you're asking is, as we go down the pipeline, will these types of studies being funded? I'm writing a grant for exactly what this listener just asked for. So, we're both going to hope together that I get funded and I'll be able to answer that question in a few years. And I do really, really hope that we're going to be moving towards being able to look at those kind of outcomes. Like, okay, if you give a math sheet, did it get better? If you look at reading, did it get better?
Right.
Not just on one level, but is everybody really, really functioning better? The reason why I'm so excited about the executive function skills improvement that we see overall, right, it's not just isolated with me, is that with improvement in executive function skills, we know that it does in fact increase school readiness or readiness to learn. So this is the huge push at the Department of Education level, is to improve executive function skills, because research does point towards improvement in executive function skills as improving outcomes for education. So that's why I can say things are looking good. But, can I quote 20 studies which have actually proven this? This is where we're not quite at this point. But the step has already been shown in other areas. So I will continue to work really hard, I promise you.
Okay. I want to make sure, we only have a little bit of time left. And there's a question that many, many people have asked, whether they're from Chicago, Canada, San Francisco, where can they find a trusted practitioner who can conduct neurofeedback in an effective fashion?
Yeah, and so this is also, I do get these emails every week, and so this is a problem because as you're hearing this is coming, this is what's happening right now. I do recommend that people go to something called the ISNR website. That's ISNR, and they do in fact have lists of people who've been certified in neurofeedback. Myself, for instance, I'm not certified, so just because somebody is not certified does not mean to say that it doesn't, they're not serious about it. But that would be one website to go through.
Okay.
and start to speak with your pediatricians. And I would recommend this for multiple reasons. It's just also for the kind of like the community effect, because a lot of pediatricians, I've obviously spoken also at pediatric conferences, and as I said before, I published in pediatrics. But a lot of pediatricians might not be fully aware of this, but that does not mean to say that, parents educate pediatricians too. And I can say this as a pediatrician, I've learned a lot through my patients. And so I would still encourage you to go to your pediatrician, and you might be surprised, this is something that more and more pediatricians are looking into, and they might have a trusted person that they have to refer their families to.
And as David says, Helvin says, it might be helpful to mention to the audience that the American Association of Pediatrics acknowledges the efficacy of neurofeedback to treat ADHD. So that might help for people seeing their own pediatricians. Can you repeat, Naomi, please, the website again? People are not able to find it. isnr.com.edu. Do you know?
It might be .org. I'm not exactly quite sure, but it's
apparently it's isnr.net. Does that also have information on Canada?
Well, it is international, and so I would think that it might be helpful for our Canadian listeners.
People saying that your website is awesome and everyone should check it out. So
thank you. I really appreciate that, because I wrote it for anybody who wanted to get any kind of information in really lay language. So it was meant for all of you out there. So I really tried to write it so that people could just learn a little bit like what we just talked about today.
All right. And then the last question, did you use multiple neurofeedback programs in your testing? And there are so many people are asking CogMed, Play Attention, lots of others. Did you use a specific kind of neurofeedback or more than one kind?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I do want to underline that there are multiple different approaches to doing neurofeedback. But, as a disclosure, this you can find in my research. It's very clearly stated. I did use what we call suppression of the theta and trying to enhance the beta. So that's the system that I use. So it's what we call suppressing the theta. You're trying to decrease those drowsiness waves, and you're trying to increase the beta waves.
Okay.
But again, there are, I would just recommend that it is, that people ask and make sure that it is a neurofeedback practitioner who uses protocols that have been researched.
Okay, neurofeedback practitioner. All right, Dr. Steiner, thank you so much. Keep up the great work. It's very encouraging to everyone to hear that there is success and that the brain is going to turn out to be as plastic as I know many people believe it will be. Your website, again, everyone, attentiontutoring.com. And thanks again for joining us today. And thanks again to our webinar sponsor, Play Attention.
You're more than welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.
If you're in business, you probably have a website, but can your site handle your growth? How many visitors before your site slows down or crashes? What about storage and data security? From web hosting to virtual servers, Pair Networks provides the online infrastructure you need to start, grow, and flourish. When it comes to security and updates, don't worry, we've got you covered. Our 24/7 US-based customer support is the best in the industry. No frustrating chatbots or sitting on hold for hours. Check out pair.com today to learn more. That's PAIR.com.